Morning, anatomy fans. It is time to talk about the digestive system. So let's do it. This marvelous tube. Buttons. Okay. So digestive system, here's what we're going to do. We're going to talk about the tube, also known as the alimentary canal, and then talk about its accessories, which include the teeth, your salivary glands, and things like the pancreas and liver. Shown here, pancreas, liver, gallbladder, storage of the bile. So your digestive system or your alimentary canal. Let's talk about the pathway. Let's get a sense of how long the tube is, what occurs in different sections, and if you were to put in valves or sphincters, in other words, if you're going to put in muscles that kind of pinch the alimentary canal or the digestive tract closed, where do you think you need those? And let's work our way through this pathway. And what occurs in different sections. If we look at our tube, starts with the mouth, and then got these part of our accessory glands are these salivary glands. I feel those when you eat something sour. But first we've got the esophagus. Esophagus goes down to the stomach, right? Esophagus to stomach. From the stomach, we have what's called the small intestines here, as you've seen on the torsos and in the cadaver, that slips behind the large intestine and then contorts its way around through the abdomen, and then from the small intestines to the large intestines. Now, of course, they get their names from their diameter, that the diameter of the small intestines is smaller than the large intestines, and the large intestines go up, over, down, and around. So, and this is known as the ascending colon, the transverse colon, the descending colon, the sigmoid colon, and then the rectum. And this guy right here, that's the appendix that's between, just found at the very beginning of your large intestine. So what's occurring in those different sections? In your mouth, it's where ingestion occurs, which is our fancy way of saying eating. And you also have mechanical digestion, meaning that there's a physical tearing or shearing apart of the food you're eating. So that's done by chewing by the teeth. And then you also have chemical digestion. So chemical digestion is when you have enzymes that are breaking the bonds that are holding molecules together. And inside of your saliva, you have some enzymes, primarily amylase, that's starting to chemically digest the starches that you're eating, which is a type of carbohydrate. Esophagus you need for swallowing. It's the tube that's going to allow the food to get from your mouth down into your stomach. Your stomach is responsible for continuing that mechanical digestion, as it has these really powerful muscle contractions, and then chemical digestion as well. Inside of your stomach, you've got some acid that helps to start to denature the proteins that you're eating, and you also produce some gastric enzymes that aid with the chemical digestion of proteins. And then from your stomach, we're going to go into the small intestines, and your small intestines also have chemical digestion. Those enzymes are going to come from the pancreas here, right? Just below your stomach is the pancreas. Those are producing enzymes that allow for chemical digestion of carbohydrates, fats, proteins, nucleic acids. And then once things are digested, that's going to allow for nutrient absorption, and lots of it. Most of your nutrients are absorbed in your small intestines. And large intestines. What do you need those for? Well, Interestingly, you can actually live without them. Many people do. But their job is for water absorption. If things move through your large intestines too quickly, and the water doesn't get absorbed into your blood, we call that diarrhea. If things go too slowly through the large intestines and lots of water gets pulled out, we call that constipation. So hopefully you're in the Goldilocks zone there. Not too much, not too little. Your large intestine is also full of bacteria, and that bacteria has many roles, and one of them is it actually produces most of the vitamin K that's in your body, is made by bacteria in your large intestines. You need vitamin K to help your blood clot properly if you get a wound. And then, of course, the end of the journey is excretion, and that is where your rectum, anus comes in. Pour out, so to speak. So how long's that tube? What do you think? 3 feet, 9 feet, 17 feet, 30 feet, 100 feet? Let's find out. So at the beginning, you have your mouth, and let me get my prop here and see what you can, oh, I had to move rooms because, you know, life. So let me get out of this mode of cat unicorn psychedelic madness. Hold on. This requires me finding the right buttons at the right time. Talk amongst yourselves. Tell yourself, oh, there we go. All right. So, right, start with your mouth. Sphincter number 1, by the way. Your mouth is a few inches long, but you need to swallow through your mouth and from your mouth down to your esophagus. And as you can see here, right, you use your tongue to push that chewed food up against the top of your mouth. Try this at home. Not really, because it won't go well, but try to swallow without using your tongue. It just doesn't work. So you need your tongue, press it up against the roof of your mouth, and then you're going to enter the esophagus. Notice our friend, the epiglottis here, has bent down so as not to choke ourselves. So we're going to move down through the esophagus. Spends a few seconds in your esophagus. It's about that long, just a few inches long, down to your stomach, just below your diaphragm. And we enter the stomach. So let's think about sphincters. So you've got, right, sphincter is just a circular muscle that can close, pinch off a tube. Mouth is a sphincter. That's handy because otherwise when you're chewing, things go everywhere. Don't want that to happen. You also have a sphincter at the top of your esophagus. That's this blue here. That needs to close just after you've swallowed so that things only go down to your stomach instead of getting squished back out of the esophagus. And then as you travel down your esophagus, your next sphincter is between your esophagus and your stomach right here. When this one fails, we call that heartburn. So this sphincter, if it doesn't hold closed, when you've got food in your stomach and your stomach's churning around, it's got lots of acid in there. If that sphincter doesn't hold, then that acid can get up into your esophagus, and your heart is sitting right here, and so it can feel like heartburn, but it's really esophageal burn if we want to be technical. Acid in your esophagus. Things that lead to that, well, some people are just more prone to it than others, but things that can contribute to it are eating too fast, so you're filling up the stomach too fast, and then for some people, spicy foods make it so that sphincter just doesn't like to close. All right, and then your stomach, just a few inches long as well, 6 to 8-ish or so. People of different sizes have different sized stomachs, and the shape can vary, but basically that's it. So yeah, stomach time. So it takes just a few, depending on how long you're chewing, a few moments to chew, but then once it gets down in the tube, how long is that food going to stay in that tube? So it just takes a few seconds to swallow. And then once you've eaten a full meal, it takes about 3 to 4 hours for your stomach to empty. Why is that? Well, you have this sphincter here, right? That's the lower esophageal sphincter. And then you have this sphincter here that's really important. It's called your pyloric sphincter. And it stays pretty closed most of the time, and then it just lets out a little bit of food at a time. That's important because, as we've talked about, acidic environment. So if it let the stomach empty too quickly, one, your food wouldn't be completely mechanically digested from the stomach. Two, the acids and the enzymes in your stomach wouldn't be able to do their full jobs. And then three, if it emptied too fast, well, then you have all this acid dumping out into your small intestines. That's a problem. Your small intestines, the enzymes that are there don't work in an acidic environment. And so your body has to neutralize that acid in order for those enzymes to continue to work. And it can do that with help from the pancreas, more on that later. But it can do that if the stomach empties at a slow rate. If it empties too fast, then it gets overwhelmed and it can't neutralize that acid. And then you have way too much chyme. Once we start to chew and swallow food, we call it chyme. Too much chyme in the small intestines all at once, and that messes up absorption as well as the acidic environment. So that sphincter is super important, your pyloric sphincter. Other thing to note here is you have 1, 2, 3 layers of smooth muscle in the stomach that helps with mechanical digestion. So the rest of your tube, you have 2 layers of smooth muscle that's going to help move things through waves of peristalsis throughout your entire digestive tract. But your stomach does a lot of mechanical churning, and that extra layer of smooth muscle helps it to do that. Oh, the labeled slide. Esophagus, it's called the lower esophageal sphincter. It's also called the gastroesophageal sphincter, because why not give it 2 names? Gastro meaning stomach. And then here's that pyloric sphincter. And then the very beginning of your small intestines is called your duodenum or your duodenum. Duoden or duoden means 12. And as we'll look at soon, it's hard not getting ahead of myself. This first section of your small intestines, the first anatomists who were doing dissections were like, oh, that's about 12 finger lengths width. And so they named it this very first section of your small intestines, the duodenum or the duodenum. And it's an important section of your small intestines. Stay tuned. Wouldn't you like to see this beautiful organ in action? Yes, you would. Let's do that. New share. I love YouTube. Somebody said, hey, let's get a camera and stick it down your esophagus when your stomach's empty, and then let's put it on YouTube with some great music. So I'm going to turn that down a bit. What you're looking at is a camera that's gone down the esophagus, and you're looking at the stomach. And now what you're seeing is the first peristaltic wave. So when we talk about mechanical digestion and churning of the stomach, this is what it's doing. Look how tight that gets. Oh. So your stomach has about 3 peristaltic waves a minute. Here comes the next one, ride that wave. And then down here, that's that pyloric sphincter that you're looking into the small intestines there. So the strength of that peristaltic wave can increase as the stomach senses that it has food in it. It's got this entire enteric nervous system in the stomach. Actually, more neurons in your stomach than in your digestive tract than your spinal cord. No, don't do that. So you kind of have this stomach brain. Anyway, 3 of those waves per minute. Strength increases when you have food in your stomach, but not necessarily the frequency, and that is assisted by your autonomic nervous system, particularly your parasympathetic nervous system is the one that helps you to mechanically digest things. Oh dear. And moving on. So this image is just to show that as that peristaltic wave moves through the stomach, at the very end, as the contents get moved towards that pyloric sphincter, the pyloric sphincter opens just a little bit. It just lets a few mils, like 3 to 5 mils of fluid through at a time, and then it's going to close again for the next peristaltic wave. And as we talked about, it's important that all that stomach content doesn't leave your stomach too quickly. So 3 to 4 hours in the stomach. What's next? Small intestines. So some cool things about your small intestines. As we talked about, chemical digestion happens there, and then also absorption of the majority of your nutrients are happening within the small intestines. And if you were just to take that tube, which is, oh, how long is that tube, Erin? Well, here's our pyloric sphincter. Here's your small intestines. Whoa, it's still going. Still going. How many feet do you think this is? We're still going. So when you're, oh, there's still more. Any estimates? Let me hear. When you are dead and all those muscles inside of your intestines are relaxed, it's estimated that the average person's small intestines, oh, we're almost there, is about 20 feet long. Wow. Incredible, right? All of that fits inside there. So about 20 feet long, your small intestines, when the smooth muscles totally relax. So it's going to be shorter while you're alive because there's some muscle tone there. At the end of your small intestines, you of course have another sphincter. This one's called your ileocecal sphincter because the end part of your small intestine is called the ileum. You'll remember your hips called that iliac crest, right? So this is the valve that helps prevent backflow from your large intestines into your small intestines. So for the most part, the job of your valves, sphincters, is the primary job is to prevent backflow. Right? You want food to go in one direction through this whole thing, it's not a 2-directional street, unless you're really sick and then we've got to get rid of stuff and we vomit some stuff out. But for the most part, things are moving in one direction. And so those sphincters or valves are preventing backflow. In the case of the pyloric sphincter, it's also controlling the rate at which the stomach empties. But this one's critical because you don't want the bacteria that's here to move up in here. That would cause some illness. So what's this dog about? Well, when we look at these 20 feet of your small intestines, and you could measure the surface area of just the tube, the inside of that tube, if you could take the inside of that tube and lay it out and look at the surface area of it, it would be about 1 meter squared, which would basically be a dog bed for a large woofie. That's some substantial surface area. While your food, your digested food, is in your small intestines, it's going to spend about 3 or 4 hours there as it's becoming chemically digested and absorbed. Right? It needs to spend enough time in there to get the nutrients out of the food that you're eating. But here's the deal. It's not just a smooth tube. You've got some anatomical features that increase the surface area. And this is right? A theme we're kind of starting to discover through anatomy is increasing the surface area to get jobs done. You saw it in your lungs, lots of surface area of your alveoli in order for gas exchange to happen. You saw it in your cardiovascular system, lots of surface area of those capillary beds. They branch a lot. That helps them to do nutrient gas exchange with the tissues of your body. Saw lots of long little nephron tubes, right? Lots of surface area there to allow for reabsorption of nutrients back into your blood system. It's a theme. I'll stop going through things, but here's another example of increased surface area helping to get a job done. And in this case, the job is absorbing nutrients into the blood or the lymph system. So when you look inside the small intestine, the first thing you would see are these circular folds. And these you could actually see with your naked eye, that there's this undulation of the surface area of your small intestines. And then those undulations also have more microscopic up and downs. We call those the villi. And then if we looked at an individual cell, and we've looked at these before, do you remember? These cells are simple columnar epithelium. That's handy in that it's one layer. So one layer of epithelium instead of stratified lots of layers. One layer helps allow for absorption of nutrients into this capillary bed that you see in here. And then this green thing is the lymph. So we talked briefly about the lymph system in that it helps pick up extra fluids that get leaked out by capillaries. In the case of your your small intestines, your lymphs also helping to absorb nutrients, and primarily they're helping to absorb the fats that you've eaten. Okay, but these simple columnar epithelium in your small intestine also have a way to increase surface area. So then when you look at individual cells, they have these up, down, up, down, up, down, and these are called microvilli. That all helps increase the surface area of your intestines to 30 to 40 square meters. That's like half a tennis court. It's a lot. Awesome. There's a video. Let's check out what it is. This is a video about segmentation. It's not a lava lamp. It's what you're actually looking at is images of the small intestines with food inside of the small intestines. And you'll notice it kind of has this swishing back and forth, goes back and forth, and ponder why that might aid absorption of nutrients. This milking back and forth, squish, squish. It's kind of relaxing. Better than a lava lamp. It's inside of you. How awesome is that? What does this do for absorption? Well, rather than just squeezing all that digested food through your small intestines, it's doing this swishing back and forth motion. And that's going to help to, one, mix the food with the enzymes that are in your small intestine. And two, it helps it spend more time in your small intestine to give your small intestine the time it needs to absorb all of those marvelous nutrients from your food. Fabulous. Close those. Hi. What button do I need? Oh, wow. I'm supposed to be getting better at this, right? Okay. So, small intestine, big picture. It's where absorption happens. You have anatomical features to help that happen, things like circular folds, villi, microvilli. Are circular folds enough? No, it takes villi. And you also have this segmentation that's increasing the amount of time that food is staying, digested food is in the small intestines, and it's mixing the digested food with the enzymes. Next. Oh, well, let's talk about gastric bypass surgery for just a moment. What are we bypassing when we do a gastric bypass surgery? Well, the point is, in a gastric bypass surgery, is to reduce the amount of food that's being absorbed into the body. So what does most of the absorption? Small intestines. So here's a sketch. See if you can figure out what's going on here with one of the modes that the gastric bypass surgery is done. So here you have the stomach. And often the stomach, the size of the stomach is reduced. It's not taken out because that's not necessary and probably a bad idea for several reasons. Stomach's doing, including churning your food around, it also produces hormones that help you to regulate things like your metabolism and talk to your brain about when it's time to eat and when it's not time to eat. All right, so they've taken a portion of the stomach and added this tube here, and we'll just follow this tube down, that then is going to become boop into the large intestines. There's a little appendix. So this must be part of the small intestines. What we've bypassed here is here's our stomach, here's the duodenum or the duodenum. So the beginning of the small intestines have been bypassed, and then it's going to be plugged back in here, back into the small intestines. So food is going to go now into the small pouch and then through the later portion of the small intestines and then into the large intestines. This tube, which is the beginning of the small intestines, is also plugged in here. Well, why is that important? Well, this duodenum here, this is where the bile enters into the small intestines, as well as the pancreatic enzymes and buffers, which are chemicals that help take the acidic pH to a neutral pH. So you still need all those fluids, both the bile and the pancreatic juices, in order to digest your food and get any nutrients at all from them. You would starve to death, basically, without your pancreas and your bile, because you couldn't get the molecules to be small enough to be able to absorb. Your body can only absorb smaller molecules, and that's why you have to do mechanical and chemical digestion to get these molecules that are pretty big to be small enough that you can absorb them. You've got to have your bile, you've got to have the pancreatic juices to do that. So that's why they plug this back into the small intestines. However, what you've bypassed is this whole section of the small intestines that would normally do quite a bit of absorption of nutrients. And so you're one, smaller chamber, so tend to eat less, and then two, bypassing this whole section of where nutrients can be absorbed. So that can be a really successful surgery for people who are in need of it and are in the circumstances where that is the best, one of the a good option for their body. And for some of them, I think it's probably their best option. One of the issues, the complications that can come out of that surgery is if you are bypassing this place where nutrient absorption is happening, sometimes your micronutrients, like your vitamins and your minerals, sometimes the body has a hard time getting enough of those out of the food that you're eating. So sometimes people are prescribed supplements. Last section. 12 to 24 hours in the large intestine. So if you've been keeping track, about 4 hours in the stomach, 4 hours in the small intestines, we're up to 8 now. So 20 to 32 hours or so before you'll see your breakfast again. It's a good science experiment to be aware of. I had a nephew when he was, well, I still have a nephew, but when he was in I don't know, sixth grade, I think, for his science experiment he did for his science class. He wanted to know what the average time it took for different people, for people in his family, to get food from their mouth to their anus. So he gave us the corn challenge, because you don't have the enzymes to digest the outer portions of the kernel of corn. You might have noticed that. So our assignment was to eat corn on the cob and then let him know when we saw that those kernels again in our poop. It's kind of fun. Anyway, this is what happens when I just talk to myself. Your large intestine, let's get back to our model. So we've got this sphincter here, this ileocecal valve here, that's preventing backflow of the bacteria that are in our large intestines back into the small intestines. Below here, we have the cecum, little appendix there. But how long is that? Well, a few feet. For most people, when that's totally relaxed, that's about 9 feet from your ascending colon, transverse colon, and descending colon through the sigmoidal colon. And then we have the very end, the rectum. You'll notice there's some sphincters here. We're going to talk about those shortly. But remember, main function of your large intestine is it does a lot of reabsorbing of water that's left in your intestines, and absorption of which vitamin? Vitamin K. So I learned about this through this book called Gulp. I know it's backwards for you, by Mary Roach. She's one of my favorite authors. This is a great book if you're interested in learning more about strange things about the digestive system. And she has a chapter on megacolons. I know it kind of looks like a big, strange earthworm, but this picture is actually from the Mutter Museum in Philadelphia. And a normal colon is about 3 inches in diameter. So something about that. Right? This megacolon at its largest diameter, which is down here, which is closer to the anus, was 30 inches in diameter. Holy moly. What's going on with these megacolons? Well, your digestive system, like your entire digestive system, is full of nerves. So this is just showing, right, spinal cord, lots of neurons, nerves coming and innervating the small intestines and the large intestines. Well, for some people, that innervation of the large intestines doesn't complete. And so you have parts of the large intestine that don't contract. They're not doing this peristaltic wave. So, well, why is that an issue? Well, you can imagine if you have parts of the large intestine that are basically paralyzed, it can't move that fecal matter through the intestines. And if it can't move through, then it starts to get impacted and it just stays there. And for people with megacolons, and well, it's called congenital aganglionic megacolon. Aganglionic, remember, ganglion was a term we used to talk about the nervous system and groups of cells in the nervous system. So this would be a disease due to development as a fetus. Something happened, that nervous system didn't get completely developed. So you don't have a nervous system there and can't contract. It's also known as Hirschsprung's disease. And this is the picture of the man who had that colon that got to be 30 inches in diameter. And this was, he lived around in the 1800s, sadly died shortly after these pictures because of complications of this. And it had been months since he had been able to defecate before these pictures were taken. It happens in about, they estimate, I think 1 in 5,000 babies. At this point, enough is known about it now that when the baby is born, usually the large intestine has some distension out of the anus sometimes, and so they're able to fix it with surgery. Basically, they cut out the portion of the small intestine that is paralyzed, and they put the healthy parts back together, and you're good to go. Elvis is thought to have had a megacolon. He had, he's part of this chapter if you want to learn more about it. But the short version is this: he had constipation issues throughout his entire life that got worse as he aged. And he actually died on the toilet. And a lot of people who have megacolons end up dying this way. In that, well, let me read to you for a bit. All right. This is from page 296, and this is the author talking to Elvis's doctor, and the doctor is telling this story. The night he died, he was bigger than usual. So because with megacolons, if you're only defecating once every month, imagine that, or less frequently than that, then that stuff has to be impacted. This colon, I don't know if you caught it, but when he died, he had 40 pounds of feces in his colon when he died. Horrible, horrible. So here's what they think killed Elvis. That night the night he died, he was bigger than usual. Depending on how long it had been since Presley had managed to empty himself, his girth fluctuated between big and stupendous. He sometimes appeared to be gaining or losing 20 pounds from one performance to the next. He wanted to get rid of his gut that night, and he was pushing and holding his breath, as people who are constipated tend to do. The technical term is called the Valsalva maneuver, and let's have Antonio Valsalva, who was writing in 1704, describe it. If the glottis, which is another word for your vocal cords, are closed after a deep inspiration and a strenuous and prolonged expiratory, meaning you're trying to push poop out, be made, such pressure can be extended upon the heart and the surrounding vessels, that the movement and flow of the blood are temporarily arrested. After a momentary spike, the heart rate and blood pressure plunge as the pressure squeezes off flow of blood. This is followed by what one paper termed the afterfling, the body taking emergency measures to get things back up to speed. The body's response to this wild Valsalvic seesawing of the vital signs can throw off the electrical rhythm of the heart. The resulting arrhythmia can be fatal. This is especially likely to happen in someone like Elvis with a compromised heart. Fatal arrhythmia is the cause of death listed on Presley's autopsy report. Probably every physician practicing emergency medicine has encountered tragic cases of sudden death in the laboratory, writes B.A. Skirikov in Cardiovascular Events at Defecation. Are they unavoidable? The chapter goes on, later on they talk about, she interviews the guy who did the autopsy, who actually I think might have written a book. People. But when they did the autopsy for Elvis, here's what they found. They found that his megacolon was jammed packed from the base of the descending colon all the way up and halfway across the transverse colon. So do you have that? So his colon was packed from here back to here. The impaction had the consistency of clay and seemed to defy Florendo's, the autopsy doctor, efforts with scissors to cut it out. And the clay material was barium, and it had been administered to prep Presley for a set of x-rays taken 4 months earlier. And the barium was there to help them. Sometimes they put barium through the intestines to take x-rays to see the health of the colon. So if you have a healthy colon, be grateful. If not, see a doctor. There are surgeries that can fix this now. Okay, the very end. You've got a few extra valves, and they're more, rather than totally total sphincters, they're more like shelves. They're called transverse folds. They're also called Houston valves, which leads to great quotes like, Houston, we have a problem. So the question is like, what are these things for? And this is what anatomists get to figure out. They weren't sure for a long time. So people had to put some papers out to figure out like, what are these transverse folds for? And the early hypothesis was they help to separate the mass from the gas. Let you ponder that for a second. But then in 2001, not that long ago, there was a paper that put forth this idea after looking at it and looking at it in detail. Anyway, an alternating side-to-side arrangement allows for a wavy movement of the stool in the rectum. The wavy movement, compartmental division, and the shelving action of the transverse folds of the rectum are suggested to slow stool movement in the rectum so as to allow time for impulses to reach the conscious level to decide whether or not to defecate. Things you didn't know you needed to be grateful for. You're welcome. All right, accessory organs and tissues. I'm going to divide this lecture up into two, so I'm going to stop this here and we'll pick up with this for part 2 of our digestive system. Once I can get the right buttons.